Hello, new account management hires. My name is Carter, and I will be speaking to you today about the sin of overselling. I will explain to you what overselling is and what it looks like in an agency. I will highlight why it's not a great tool to practice with a client, and I will also detail some disadvantages of overselling and how you can avoid it. So, what is overselling? So, overselling occurs in an agency when an agency team member continues with a proposal of a sales pitch or a form of advertising that the client doesn't really need or want. It can also occur when you offer a client a service that your agency doesn't necessarily focus on so that you can build a better relationship with that client. It can also happen when an agency attempts to make an effort to a client to convince them that a certain service or item can be cheaper or more beneficial to them than the one they're using now. And that can actually result in hurting the agency and client relationship. Because if you tell a client that your agency is a full service agency, and your agency only focuses on social media and digital, for example, that's going to create a lot of problems in that relationship. Overselling can hurt the agency deeply and put future client opportunities at risk. It can ruin the trust and loyalty between an agency and a client, and it can also result in a client being annoyed and possibly walking away from that agency. Overselling, although, may have a short term benefit to the agency because overall they do get the sale, but it comes at the expense of repeat business and client satisfaction. Overselling can also be overlooked when dealing with a client. People who are fresh to an agency may not really know every single service that their agency provides to clients, so that can result in that newly hire promoting and offering service to that client that the agency may not even offer. So, why shouldn't you practice overselling with a client? So, although overselling may be done with good intentions, it usually results in doing more harm than good. You may want to tell a client that you'll do something for them because that task or service interests you, but if your agency doesn't really focus on that certain task or service, the client will not be pleased when you go back to them and explain why that can't be done for them. Another reason why you shouldn't oversell when dealing with clients is because most clients know the industry and they know what they're looking for. If you suggest something to them that is completely off topic and random, red flags will pop up instantly and it will instill the question into the client's mind of, is this agency actually going to meet the goals and objectives that were initially laid out for me? So there are many disadvantages of overselling to a client that I will detail. Firstly, starting with the reputation of an agency. Clients come to an agency because they have a problem or an issue that needs to be solved. This certain task or project may have certain requirements that needs to be followed, like budgets and deadlines. When expectations are set too high and you aren't able to deliver on what you said you could, this can really put the client's project at risk and the agency's reputation. Agency reputation is really important for clients when they're looking for different agencies to work with, so ensuring that the agency is informed of what is to be expected of them will increase the likeliness of a client working with them again. Another disadvantage to overselling is that work can be delayed. If you've promised a client unrealistic standards that can't be met, there will be a lot more pressure to work on their project to meet their needs, and that can result in neglecting other clients and other projects. And this could then result in causing confusion and chaos in your agency because team members are really unsure about what client and what project is the top priority at that specific moment. Another disadvantage of overselling would be that your work with a client can suffer a loss in quality. When an agency has tighter deadlines, agency members tend to focus on finishing that task as fast as possible instead of really focusing on the quality that is actually being put into that work. This will then hurt the relationship with an agency and a client, as it really just shows the client that you just want to do the bare minimum for them instead of going above and beyond and exceeding the goals that they've established. Another disadvantage of overselling is that if the client notices that you are trying to oversell them, they won't want to work with your agency in the future, and they won't recommend you to other clients that are searching for agency expertise that your agency might actually offer. You never really know who that client knows in the industry, so if they feel that you are trying to oversell them, word about you and your agency can spread very quickly, and it will definitely be harder to find clients to work with in the future. The last disadvantage of overselling that I will detail would be that it could actually cause a breach in contract in your agency, and the agency could face legal consequences, damaging the agency's reputation as a whole. Obviously, not all scenarios will result in breaching your contract with an agency, but in a case that an agency does oversell their client, be prepared to explain your reasoning of why you are attempting to oversell that client. So, how would you avoid overselling? To avoid overselling, you'd really want to be realistic and honest with both yourself and the client. You would want to ask yourself that if I took on this task or project, would I be able to dedicate the appropriate time to do it? And do I have the qualifications needed to complete this project to the standards that the client expects? Clients appreciate honesty and loyalty that is shown from the agency to the client. So if you're really honest and straight up with your client, they will appreciate that and they will treat you the exact same way. A second way to avoid overselling would be to identify the client's criteria for success at the start of the project. Every client has their own view of success, so ensuring that your definition of success coincides with theirs will leave a positive effect on both the client and the agency. And this will actually leave the client satisfied and eager to work more with your agency on future tasks and projects. A third way to avoid overselling would be to find more initial research on the client. If you're asking questions to a client and they're being really vague with their answers, it can mean that you really haven't thought the situation through. You would want to ask the client more open-ended questions to really get the research and insight that you are looking for. You should also explain to the client that your detailed questions are intended to help the agency better understand the client's needs and to prevent and avoid confusion of random questions. This can help you find out more about the client that you are working with, and it can then help you avoid the possibility of overselling to them. The last way to oversell to a client is to know when to close the deal or agreement that is being talked about. Once you feel that the client and agency are on the same page with deliverables and goals, you should be able to identify when to close the deal with that client. Not knowing of when or how to close a deal with a client can result in confusion between the agency and the client, and it can really create some awkwardness between the two parties. So, just to summarize everything that was said about overselling, overselling occurs in an agency when an agency team member continues with a proposal of a sales pitch or a form of advertising that the client doesn't really need or want. It can occur when you offer a client a service that your agency doesn't necessarily focus on so that you can build a better relationship with that client. And it can also happen when an agency attempts to make an effort to a client to convince them that a certain service or item can be cheaper or more beneficial to them than the one they're using now. To summarize, some disadvantages of overselling would be including putting the reputation of an agency at risk, delaying the completion of other work around the agency, a decrease in quality of the work around the agency, hurting your chances of possible recommendations or future jobs with a client, and the possibility of a breach in contract. So just to summarize, some ways to avoid overselling would be to be very realistic and honest with yourself and the client, identify the client's criteria for success at the start of a project, do more initial research on that client to find out more information about them, and to know when to close a deal with a client. So I hope you found this video very insightful and you've learned why you shouldn't practice overselling to your client when working in an agency. Thank you for watching.